Now, it's my pleasure to introduce a man we all know as President Reagan's closest advisor and counselor and the 75th Attorney General of the United States. We've been proud to have him as a distinguished colleague at the Heritage Foundation for more than 25 years now, and while his title recently changed to Emeritus, and he says he's semi-retired, I'm not sure his wife would agree that his schedule has been cut back in any way. We're pleased that he continues to advise and mentor the Heritage team and most of the lawyers of the conservative movement. And I know he still participates in the weekly Conservative Action Project meetings. He still headlines more conferences than I have the energy to attend. And he still serves on the boards of many of the organizations represented in this room. He's at a point in his career when a trip to Florida should mean a trip to the beach and a nice game of golf. But he's come down to attend a back-to-back series of policy discussions, of course. He's just wrapped up 2 days of meetings of the Legal Strategy Forum, and he joins us this afternoon to make a presentation of our Salvatori Prize in American Citizenship. So please join me in welcoming Edwin Meese.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Bridget, for that very generous introduction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that very warm welcome. It's a great privilege to be here with you at the Resource Bank. And I think that even though I'm sure others will talk about it later, but I just want to express my personal appreciation to Bridget for all the help she's been to me during the time that I've been at Heritage, but also what a great job she does in organizing this particular event every year. I think she deserves a vote of applause. Well, as you can see from your program, this is for the presentation of the Salvatori Prize for American Citizenship. This prize is given in the name of Henry Salvatori, a successful entrepreneur, a generous philanthropist, and a great American patriot. He was a man who certainly loved his country. Many of you in this room have had the opportunity to meet Henry over the years because of his generosity to many of the groups that are represented here. And he has given generously, particularly to the Heritage Foundation, and that's why this award is named in his honor. Mr. Salvatori was born in Italy in 1901. He came to the United States as an immigrant with his parents at the age of 5 in 1906. As an adult, he became a scientist, doing his undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania, and then getting a master's degree in physics at Columbia University. He was one of those outstanding scientists, of which there are many in that period of time in the late 20s and early 30s, who worked at the Bell Labs, which at that time was one of the most inventive institutions in the United States and was the foundation for a good deal of the research that went into applied research in various industries at that time. And Mr. Salvatori, after working there, decided he would try his own abilities in the oil industry, and so he went west to Oklahoma. When he was there, he founded, through a technique on discovering oil, which he had pioneered, and so as a result of that, he founded the Western Geophysical Company, which was extremely successful and really literally made his fortune. And of course, he expanded his fortune when he sold his company in 1960, moved to California, and at that point became a major philanthropical person, a person who contributed generously, as I mentioned, to so many organizations. But particularly, he specified his gifts to organizations that were dedicated to patriotic purposes, to higher education, some both successfully and some which disappointed him, as higher education sometimes does to those who are generous to them, and also to various charitable organizations. He was a vigorous anti-communist, and indeed founded an anti-communist league, a group of patriots who were opposed and were particularly interested in talking about communism and warning about the threat of communism, particularly to those who were engaged in education, both at high school and in higher education. His great joy, actually, was being able to live long enough to see the Soviet Union implode during his lifetime, which it did just before he passed away in 1997. One of Henry's greatest achievements, really, was to lead a group of businessmen in Southern California who persuaded Ronald Reagan to run for governor in 1966. And then he led the group that literally was a major starting group to fund that campaign. And as a result, of course, that was the start of Ronald Reagan's political career, and he continued as a part of what was called the kitchen cabinet. Those men who were not only financial supporters but also advisors to Ronald Reagan, both in California and when he became president. Henry Salvatori studied history, and he was particularly admiring of George Washington, particularly, as he said, a man who left the farm and his private pursuits to serve his country in the time of need and to be a leader in so many ways. Henry was also impressed that Washington was, in a sense, as he said it, and looking at his historical studies, was following the example of Cincinnatus, who left to serve his country and then returned to the farm when his service was done. And so he felt that that kind of service by people should be rewarded and admired by the rest of the citizens of the country. And so therefore the Salvatori Prize for American Citizenship is awarded to an individual or an organization who has rendered exceptional service to the community or to the country, and which reflects the vision and the values of Henry Salvatori. To preside with me and to describe today's award, I am pleased to present Heritage's Vice President for American Studies and a great American history scholar in his own right. The next speaker will be our good friend, Matt Spalding.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you again, giving out this wonderful award. In 1825, in a letter to Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson described the Declaration of Independence as an expression of the American mind. What is unique about America is its ideas and its institutions. Its ideas of rights, equality, consent, the rule of law, in combination with what they had inherited and in their experience of self-government, under constitutional government, the American people made America into an exceptional nation. It was this liberty under law that gave rise to the human flourishing that is the American dream. We love our country, to paraphrase Lincoln, partly because it is our own country, but mostly because it is a free country. We burn with a zeal for its advancement, prosperity, and glory, because we see in it the advancement, prosperity, and glory of human liberty, human right, and human nature. That country today is in grave danger. 1976 marked our bicentennial. The nation was in the doldrums. Liberalism was ensconced. We were seeing the collapse of the Republican Party. Sounds like today. Yet 4 years later, Ronald Reagan was president, calling for a new beginning, a new party, one based on principles rather than pastels, standing firmly on the shoulders of our founding fathers. Reagan knew, and we know, that behind the American dream, behind opportunity and prosperity, behind self-governing liberty, were certain things, certain principles, certain self-evident truths that must be constantly recalled, defended, taught, enlivened, and restored. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction, he famously wrote. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected, handed on to them to do the same. Or one day we will spend the sunset days telling our children and our children's children what it was like to live in a country where men were free. This is why we must engage in the battle of ideas. This is why a central element of our movement must always be a concerted effort with teachers, scholars, political leaders, and idea makers to revive the American mind. One of the things Ronald Reagan brought with him was an argument about America. That was his message and his substance. And that was the fruit of a new and growing conservative public argument and scholarship about America, returning to its founders' wisdom and experience, looking to the documents and the example of their statesmanship, and fighting the battle of freedom on that ground. That revival and that fruit we see today in mature scholars as well as the Tea Party movement. It was nourished by scholars and institutions that set their sights on restoring the principles of the American founding. It is one of those institutions and their scholars that we honor today. In 1979, 4 graduate students decided to start an institute to overthrow the reigning orthodoxy and restore the principles of the American founding through their rightful preeminent authority in our national life, steering the nation clear of its destructive course with liberalism. By encouraging passionate debate, serious scholarship, aggressive penmanship about the most important things: politics and prudence, statesmanship, conservatism, and the evils of liberalism. They did it through publications, books, panels, academic conferences, and from the very start, they established fellowships to teach and train those coming forward, to cultivate them, to learn and to teach people to think. Journalists, young scholars, political analysts, professionals, so that they would learn how to engage in the battle of ideas. From the likes of Mark Levin to Representative Tom Cotton, we see that investment in minds and ideas bearing fruit. This is how we engage in the battle of ideas, and this is why, by cultivating principled thinkers and leaders, we will revive the American mind, and how we'll deploy them at this precious time when our country needs these arguments more than ever. For their scholarly contributions to and public defense of the principles and actions of our nation's founding, their long-term work in recovering those ideas in the minds and hearts of the American people, of America's leaders, and future leaders. The 2013 Henry Salvatori Prize for American Citizenship is hereby awarded to the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy. Please join me in congratulating them. And I welcome the President to accept it, Brian Kennedy.
Thank you, Matt. I'm Brian Kennedy, President of the Claremont Institute. Oh, portrait. Very nice. Thank you. My name is Brian Kennedy. I'm president of the Institute. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for all your own work at the Heritage Foundation. Matt Spalding was a Publius Fellow of ours back in the, I guess it would have been the late 80s. Matt and I went to college together, actually. Matt, of course, has aged much better than I have. Thank you as well to General Meese and your leadership of the conservative movement. It is fair to say it would not be the same movement without you. And let me welcome Senator Jim DeMint to the vicious world of think tankery. If you thought the U.S. Senate was a tough place, just you wait. But since your first major decision as president of Heritage was to award the Salvatori Prize to the Claremont Institute, I would say you're off to an excellent start. So on behalf of the board, staff, and fellows, of the Claremont Institute, let me say it's a great honor to receive the Salvatori Prize. The Claremont Institute was begun in 1979 when, as Matt said, a group of 4 graduate students in Claremont went to go visit Henry Salvatori. Henry Salvatori at the time, of course, 79, was thinking about how to help Ronald Reagan get elected president. But they went to Mr. Salvatori, these 4 graduate students, and asked him if he would help them start an organization dedicated to defending the principles of the American founding. Now, they drew straws on this point. They were going to ask him for $1 million because they said that they needed $1 million. It seemed like a good round number. And could he give them that $1 million? And he said, well, they were very nice young men, but they'd have to prove themselves. And so he gave him a very small check, but give him a check he did, and over the years became a very generous benefactor of the Claremont Institute. Mr. Salvatori was a great man, and he was moved by these very young men, I guess they were all probably in their 20s at the time, who founded the Claremont Institute. There are names that you know. Larry Arnn, who's now president of Hillsdale College, Peter Schramm of the Ashbrook Center, Chris Flannery, who serves as the senior editor of our Claremont Review of Books, and the late Tom Silver, who was my predecessor as president of the Institute. These young men made to Mr. Salvatori an argument. They said that modern conservatism was built on opposition to Soviet communism abroad and rampant liberalism here at home, that conservatives back then knew what they were against, but they didn't really understand what they were for or what they ought to be for. They said that what conservatives ought to be for were the principles of the American founding, those principles that can be found in the Declaration of Independence, the writings of Thomas Jefferson, of Alexander Hamilton, of James Madison, in the statecraft of George Washington, and in the moral and political philosophy of Abraham Lincoln. And although it may sound strange today, such principles were not believed much back then and were opposed or misunderstood by many conservative writers. Even the great Irving Kristol once said that Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and the Statute for Virginia for Religious Freedom, that Jefferson never wrote anything worth reading. Back then, many in the conservative movement only knew, as I say, what they were against, and that we really weren't winning the Cold War. But for the most part, they hadn't studied the American founding. It was our teacher in Claremont, Harry Jaffa, who taught us about the political principles and the political philosophy of Abraham Lincoln and the founders. That absent such guiding principles, American conservatism was as deficient as American liberalism, and certainly was not going to defeat it. We have sought to explain how modern liberalism, or what we know as progressivism, is unmaking the constitutionalism of the American founding, the very idea that government should be limited in its nature and that Americans could govern themselves, that it is possible to govern themselves with their God-given human reason, what the founders called the laws of nature and nature's God. We have had a century of the progressive project to unmake the American idea. We see it in full flower in the presidency of Barack Obama. This progressive departure from the founding and a defense of the American regime has been explained, as Matt said, by Claremont scholars like Charles Kessler, now the editor of our Claremont Review of Books, by Tom West and R.J. Pastrito, now of Hillsdale College, Professor Ed Erler and John Marini, both senior fellows of the Institute, and writers who write for our Claremont Review of Books like Mark Helprin and Angelo Codavilla. This Claremont conservatism has been spread through our legal work at our Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence, led so ably by Dr. John Eastman, who's here today, through our Publius and Lincoln Fellows programs, and now our Marshall Fellows programs for young lawyers. These Publius and Lincoln Fellows are now senior thinkers at places like the Heritage Foundation and at think tanks and journals in Washington, D.C. I would add that one of the Institute's senior fellows is with us here today, Doug Jeffrey, now Vice President of Hillsdale College. He's also one of the great minds of the conservative movement, one of this country's most important assets. Thank you, Doug, for being here. Let me say in closing that many people believe today our republic is over, that its best days are behind us, and it would be easy to say they are wrong. But the honest and sober answer is that this republic is in a precarious place. It will either return to its first principles and see its best days, or it will slip into a progressive bureaucratic despotism that will be unable to defend itself from its enemies at home and abroad. It is our charge, all of us here today, to defend this nation and the grand experiment in Republican government, the natural law principles of the founding and the dream of liberty and equality vindicated by Abraham Lincoln and defended on battlefields near and far by generations of American patriots. That is the task for this generation. So on behalf of those nice young men and now women in Claremont who have made it their life's work to defend and recover the American idea, I would like to thank the Heritage Foundation, our old friend and colleague Matt Spalding, and most certainly Henry Salvatori for this honor. We will work hard to deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. In addition to the wonderful portrait we have here, which is a reproduced on canvas famous the porthole portrait of Washington, the award includes a $25,000 check to support the work of the Claremont Institute. I ask your indulgence for one quick moment. Henry Salvatori established an endowment to promote our nation's common dedication to the principles of the founding and encourage enlightened patriotism. And when he established the Salvatori Prize, he wanted to honor those who exemplified America's principles and embodied the virtues of character and mind of those founders. That's what he meant by enlightened patriotism. As Mr. Meese mentioned, he spoke often of Washington, his favorite founder, and Cincinnatus, and he often spoke of Roman virtues, trustworthiness, loyalty, service to country, and sacrifice. He liked the idea of America's ideas in action, citizenship at its highest, its most noble. It has been our intent to make the award based on that every year. Over the years, as I have worked with Ed Meese, and we've talked about these things, about politics and ideas, the founding, the Constitution, enlightened patriotism, and contemplated this prize, I have often thought, giving it out, and I'm sure many of you have as well as we've given it out, who best personifies that prize. Many of you know Ed Meese for a long time, worked with him, perhaps longer than I have, many careers. He's mentored many. There's little we can do to honor him, but honor him we must, and nevertheless. And I ask you to join me in thanking him for his service, his sacrifice, his commitment to principle, and I just want to take this moment to say his complete personification of all that this prize represents. And we want to thank him with a small token of our appreciation for embodying everything that this prize and American citizenship means. Thank you, Ed Meese.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is a total surprise, and I am really overwhelmed. You know, they say that a prophet is not without honor save in his own country, but you are kind enough to honor me and for Heritage to honor me today, and I am very grateful. The best thing that really happened to me was at the end of the Reagan administration to be offered by Ed Fulner and Phil Trulock the opportunity to come to Heritage. I have thoroughly enjoyed these almost 25 years. Heritage was a great organization. It was certainly the organization, more than any other, that provided the ideas and the thoughts and the good advice for Ronald Reagan and his administration. From mandate from leadership, where we received those galleys, not yet into a book, but on the way to a book, sometime during the transition. And then when the books came, Ronald Reagan himself, having read the galleys was so impressed, put a copy of that mandate for leadership at the place of each of the cabinet members when he had his first cabinet meeting even before the inauguration, and told each one to read that book, particularly the chapter pertaining to their particular jurisdiction, and then to implement those ideas. And that made for a bond between Heritage and the Reagan administration from that point on. And so at the end of the administration, to have the honor of being asked to serve at Heritage was one of the greatest privileges of my time. And now to have this recognition today as I pass into that emeritus status that Bridget talked about, although I am grateful for the chance of maintaining a continuing relationship, I just want to thank Heritage, Ed, Phil, and now Jim, and all of the members of the Heritage family. It's been a great thrill for me, it's a great privilege, and it's been a great service that this organization has done to the country. So, and all of you being here today really makes it special for me. Thank you very much.